Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome to Means of Grace. I'm Melissa McGill, the Director of Communications for the Western North Carolina Conference. In this special episode, you get to hear from all 6 of our hosting panel. This is the first time we've ever had a conversation with each other. You usually hear from us separately and focused on our specialized areas of ministry.
Jesse and I normally host or co-host podcasts together, so we can introduce ourselves together. I'm Kim Ingram, the Director of Ministerial Services.
And I am Jesse Ennis, the Director of Communications for the Leadership Development Team of the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
I'm Luke Edwards. I'm the Associate Director of Church Development and primarily responsible for Fresh Expressions and Dinner Church.
I'm Brian Mateer, and I am the Associate Director of Missional Engagement, working out of the Connectional Ministries Department of the conference.
And I'm Caroline Wood, the Director of Missional Engagement and Connectional Ministries for the Western North Carolina Conference.
Awesome. It's so cool to be on the same call with you guys. We usually do them separately, so this is really cool. So it's been a really big year for the Means of Grace podcast. We started in October of 2019, so this wraps up our full first year. We went weekly in October, and then last month in November, we hit 10,000 downloads. We also added 2 more hosts into the rotation, Brian and Caroline. We've heard some great episodes from you guys this year. And we've also published around 30 episodes, plus a mini series of 6 episodes that coordinated with our Passions of Jesus Lenten study. It's been a busy year and one that has challenged all of us in so many ways. But looking back, we've had some really incredible conversations on the podcast. So you guys, what have been some of your favorite moments this year? Why don't we start with Caroline?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. So I must admit that one of my favorite moments was not when I was hosting. I was so much more relaxed and had so much more fun when I was with Jesse and he was firing questions at me and I was just able to talk and be my crazy self. So it was, that episode was on art and spiritual direction. And so it was fun.
Sounds exciting. So what got you interested in this type of spiritual renewal?
Well, it's like many things, the Lord just I kind of trip into them, if you will. Mm-hmm. So this goes back to days when I was doing active planning with a youth spiritual retreat. Mm-hmm. And there was a book, Praying in Color. I did a workshop with youth at this retreat, and the youth were quiet for about 30 minutes, drawing their prayers to God.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so it really struck a chord inside me. And then completely separate occasion, separate event. I was actually at a Safe Sanctuaries training where my now spiritual director was as well. And she just was prompted to ask if I would like to join a group that she was starting.
Okay.
And I came into the practice that way.
All right.
That's what got me hooked, to be honest. It's all Jesse's fault, y'all. All Jesse's fault.
Thanks, Jesse. We're very grateful to you for getting her involved.
I do what I can, even when I don't know exactly what I'm doing. So
I feel like that's been all of us as we jump into the podcast world, but we've learned as we go.
Absolutely.
As I demonstrated by making a mistake today.
Luckily, we didn't get it on record, though, so you're good.
Actually, my one of my most memorable moments actually comes from the same episode. So for one, that was my first opportunity to meet Caroline. Also, I had one of the greatest sound bits, I think, for myself was having a conversation with Reverend Angela Pleasance and what she said about when she first really started getting into spiritual renewal practices.
Yes, spiritual renewal is something that came out of my family practice growing up, but it really did not hit home with me until 11 years ago. Not going into great detail, but just a little bit snippet. I call it my dark night of the soul that I went through. And it was a period in my life where I forgot my first love. I'm getting caught up in the daily grind of ministry work. And I know that sounds strange because everybody think pastors, we're up there, right there with God, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then you have pastor. But sometimes the work can become, instead of a spiritual life that we live, it can become something that we just do as a daily work. And that's what it became for me, to the point that it became about Angela. And during that period of time, I began to withdraw from everything that I was doing in the conference. I was serving in Charlotte at the time at a church, Central United Methodist. And I remember it was the middle of the night on a Friday night. I was sitting in my room. All the lights were out. I was bawling before God. And I cried out. I said, God, I feel like I have lost everything. And clearly I heard God speak to my heart and said, now I can use you.
That's always kind of stuck with me, especially given this year and the many challenges that myself as a pastor and other pastors have gone through.
Well, so I actually, when I thought of this question, my first thing was to give a shout out to Jesse too, because one of my favorite things about hosting the podcast is really just being able to do it collaboratively with him, that we've been able to think through episodes and guests and questions together. And it's been a lot of fun working that way. But then when I looked back over the podcast, I think one of my favorite things about them, and it's not necessarily one podcast in particular, is the opportunity to tap into people in their passions and in their sweet spots. So that when you have a conversation and somebody gets animated about something that they're sharing, it's because it's something that they feel deeply. Just a couple of examples of those were the podcast on adaptive leadership. I think that's really important to Lori Beth Huffman. And when she talks about that, she gets passionate and really engaged.
Thanks. And I agree with everything that you guys have said. I would add, again, adaptive leadership becomes super important this day and time, just because culture changes so fast, technology changes so fast, and the church now is changing so fast, which is kind of funny because we think of the church as like not changing. And yet what is happening around us absolutely affects how we do church.
In the same way, the podcast with Jan Britton and Jamie Hamrick, their love for the church and their love for God was so evident in the conversation kind of around divisive times and how do you lead through that it was clear that they had really given it a lot of thought and it meant a lot to them.
This has become much more difficult in recent years. One of the things that I have always valued about the United Methodist Church is the wide range of viewpoints that can be present on the pews at the same time, because we were not united in our political stance, even our biblical interpretation. We were united at the cross of Jesus Christ, and that was clearly the reason that we were there.
In fact, we are starting to, have services now. And our first time was yesterday, but we did some political service announcements the week leading to it and did 3 of those. And at the end of those, every one of those, I asked folks to leave their political opinions at home. We're here to worship God, and God is much more important in my worship than my political thoughts. So to me, it's not about whether you're a peacock or a fox, an elephant, a donkey, as long as you're for the lion and the lamb. And that's what we've got to focus on.
And then talking to Mark Barton, and he's such a storyteller. And so when Mark tells a story and he laughs, and you just capture that laugh and it makes you feel good. Or just some examples of where people really kind of got into their sweet spots on the podcast.
There is one time when my dear wife, who is just as calm and cool as a cucumber, when I really thought she was going to lose it. And that is when we moved everything into the den so that the parsonage committee could have access to the rest of the house. And Saturday before moving day, and moving day was on Tuesday, as it is now, the parsonage committee chairperson came up to Barbara on a Saturday and said, when can you move everything out of the den so that we can get in the middle and install a ceiling fan? And I could tell, oh, lady, you asked the wrong question. And with all coolness and togetherness that my wife always displays, she says, I think a good time to do that would be on Tuesday about 1:00. And the one
for me, one of my the most memorable episodes was one that was recorded about a year ago now, the Grief at Christmas episode. And I remember listening to it in the car on my way to the Mission Response Center. And I had to pull over because all of a sudden it was hard to see, not because it was raining, but because my eyes were misty. And it just meant a lot to me. And I think it meant a lot to a lot of other people that have experienced grief around the holidays. And I just remember that is kind of the episode that really got me thinking a lot more about how I might contribute to the conversation that's going on around our conference.
And then here's the thing, and this is the most important thing. You want people to leave with hope, not necessarily with joy, because I don't think that you're going to come in an hour and suddenly you're going to feel holly jolly. Like, that's not the end game. The end game is not that they leave with joy. The end game is that they leave with hope. And that means reminding people why Jesus came into the world. And I think if you can do this well, I think it really helps people to find that sort of sense of hope.
For me, I think a favorite moment, and just a moment that's kind of representative of this past crazy year, is the episode that I recorded at New Covenant with Meyer Dawn and their dinner church. And I recorded it, I think, maybe 2 weeks before lockdown went into place, when the pandemic was still somewhere else, and we didn't at all sink in that this was going to happen to us, And so that episode, by the time it got released, we were on lockdown. And so just the kind of dissonance of that episode, of just the congregation singing together, the sound of sharing a meal, the laughter, just comparing that to what the reality was when it came out and what the reality's been this year, is kind of jarring. And also like hopeful, like that, that we'll return to that at some point, that we'll be able to share a meal together, we'll be able to laugh together, we'll be able to sing together. And so I think that episode for me is just kind of representative this year.
It's been said that most innovation isn't creating something altogether new, but rather combining two things that have existed for some time, but had yet to be combined. I suppose dinner church is kind of like that.
And then I just looking over the episodes of this past year, just been inspired, and of just how much time that the church, the Methodist Church, our conference, the churches within our conference have spent making adaptive changes this past year. Like if you just look at our episode list, it's like, how did campus ministry change? How did mission trips change this year? How are we starting house churches? How have we changing our conversation around race? All these things where we're just doing the difficult work of adaptive change. And I think that we should have been having these conversations before the pandemic, but I am glad that we are having those conversations now. And I hope that we continue to have those conversations moving forward. I think about the Tony Campolo quote, if the 1950s comes back, the church will be ready. I think the church has changed more this year than we probably have in 60 years combined. I know it's because of a horrible thing that's happened, but I also find hope in that perhaps we might be able to move forward and to continue to look reflectively about how we gather as a church, what we do as a church, the conversations we have as a church, and continue to reflect and to make those adaptive changes.
Absolutely. I would say one of my favorite episodes to record. They've all been amazing. And I've loved hearing you guys share your conversations as well. It's been a wonderful year to listen into what's going on throughout the conference. But one of my favorites to record was the Contemplative Prayer series that I did with Ashley Thomas and Melanie Dobson. We actually recorded that just maybe a week into the shutdowns back in March. And just for me, that time to sit and reflect as we were recording and they were walking us through the contemplative practices, that just brought so much centering and peace to me at the beginning of the quarantine that just really helped me out a lot, personally. So even I experienced it along with our listeners that time, and it was really great.
So inviting in our God who extends to the farthest reaches of the universe, that comes and dwells in us. Become attentive and aware of the presence of the Holy Spirit of God, dwelling within you in your very heart center.
So Luke also hit on some of the challenges that we've encountered through the podcast and through the church. What does that look like for each of you?
Well, Melissa, it's been learning new technology, just learning how to set up for recording a podcast, and recording them over Zoom. And, that looks much different because we recorded that episode with Jesse that I was on in person. And now we're recording them on Zoom. And so there've been some challenges in that and blessings, I'll say. So to be honest, Kim really said something one day that made me think, since we're working remotely, we work all the time. We don't have those interactions with other people. So it feels like we're getting on top of things, but we're actually working more and harder because we're not allowing margin for that. And so it's really made me think about increasing some margin and not working all the time.
Absolutely. We've had to pivot right along with all of our churches and figuring this out. And shout out to our producer, Andy Go, for helping us get set up on mics and learning how to do the Zoom recording. Because as Caroline mentioned, we were doing most of our recordings in person. And all of us have had to learn some new skills, and it's been challenging at points for sure. Jesse, I think you have a story to share about this.
I do. So one thing during that interview with Carolyn, I remember us recording in the conference building and having quite a bit of background noise because there was some construction going on. So even before COVID, there were a lot of challenges. But the biggest challenge for me was during COVID. Speaking of technical challenges, I thought it would have been a good idea to just record from my headphones. And listening back to our recording, quickly realized that recording was absolutely terrible. And so went back and listened to all of it and re-recorded myself. And that is not an experience I would like to go through again. So thanks to the direction of Andy, shout out to Andy again. Whenever I'm recording from home, I will be recording from my closet with my microphone that I purchased, because that is just a safe bet from now on.
Absolutely. I just took a screenshot too, so they can see all of us in our settings, and Jesse's in his closet. So it's a great visual. Whatever works. We've all learned to do whatever works to get the audio this year.
I like that sweater in your closet, Jesse. That's nice with the stripes.
You can borrow it whenever you want to, man.
Thanks.
So a challenge for me that has nothing to do with COVID is just a podcast challenge. And it's true in writing sermons, I think, for people as well, is coming up with titles. So the kind of whole nature of a podcast is you want it to be relevant and contextual and, meaningful to the people who listen to it. And the first thing they're going to capture their attention is going to be the title. And I'm terrible at titles. And so that for me probably has been one of the most challenging things. It's just, what do you call it that makes people be interested in it in order to go to the next step and hit play? One of the things I've enjoyed that also has been a challenge, but it's part of the kind of figuring it out is the formats. Do you have a one-on-one conversation? Do you have kind of a small group conversation? Do you have kind of series of conversations that you all put together into one? So that's been kind of another fun challenge to figure out what works in different contexts or different ways.
I have officially recorded 2 interviews without pressing record and had to totally redo them.
That is my worst nightmare.
Yep. I've done it twice now and it's not fun. Both guests have been quite gracious. So that's been good. But besides that, challenges, I think just not being able to see people in person. I think I was really starting to enjoy the kind of storytelling elements of being able to record parts of the event or the thing that we were telling the story about. And so having that kind of taken away temporarily has been difficult. Also just losing my quiet space, even though there's construction at the basement of the downstairs of the conference office, it is a lot quieter than a house with a 2-year-old running around screaming in the background. So that's been a challenge. And then I think just kind of maybe a little more existentially, when the pandemic hit, like I was and I think a lot of people might relate to this, but like we were in kind of like, I need as much information as I can about how to adapt, how to switch to online worship, how to what does pastoral care look like? What do all these things look like that have been changed? And I wanted to listen to it all. I want to go to all the webinars, wanted to listen to all the podcasts. And then I don't know when it hit, but all of a sudden it hit like, I don't want to listen to anything else about this pandemic. Like, I'm so tired of it. I'm so tired of talking about it. Like, and so I think that's a creative challenge for producing content. There's the noise. There's a cat in my background today, not a 2-year-old. But yeah, that creative challenge of, all right, how do we make content for folks that's relevant, that's needed, and won't just get lost in the kind of white noise of the million other Zoom calls and webinars and podcasts that are available.
So kind of on that topic of relevant conversations, what are topics that you guys are excited to cover in future episodes?
I think I'm excited to kind of revisit some of the other conversations that we've had. I think we've had some really great conversations so far. We've had some guests that have really enlightened us, but we try to keep our episodes to 30 minutes as best as we can. And some of those conversations could go on for hours. And so I'm hoping that we can revisit some of those. And recently I have been reminded of the foster children in the foster system, and I'm hoping that in the new year we can have a conversation about ministries that are happening around foster children or opportunities that we have to minister to them.
So I'd say that the pandemic has really kind of upset the mission apple cart. I mean, when you can't go and do like you're used to, you really think about it in a different way. You think about the importance of partnerships, the importance of kind of those layers of mission, of preparation, of support, and less so about the physically the going. So I think one of the opportunities of the pandemic and one of the things that I look forward to capturing in the new year is how might this change how we do mission moving forward. As on the horizon, we have a vaccine and folks will be revisiting what mission looks like. So it's just an opportunity for us to change things that maybe were harmful or were not working. But look towards maybe some new adventurous ways, or take some risk of ways that we've been thinking about, but may have been stuck. That this pandemic has opened up new doors and windows into a new way.
Normal churches that are doing really creative things, like like so often in the church world, we look to these like big mega churches, or these like churches with a ton of people in worship with huge budgets, and go to their conferences and see what they're doing. But I think that the stories that really inspire me are the ones that are these churches of 35 people, these churches of 100 people that have just done some creative ministry, that are meeting a new need, that are gathering people in a new way. And so I'm just looking forward to finding more of those stories in this coming year, of just the everyday people of God that are following the Spirit and doing some incredible work.
Absolutely.
Luke, just following up on that. So that makes me think of something I'd been thinking about, how we might do in 2021. And so the Board of Ordained Ministry has a team of the board has conversations with a group of our clergy every year that are in extension ministry or appointments beyond the local church. And those folks are usually working in organizations or in LLCs, nonprofits of different sorts, kind of in their communities, extending the church into the community. And in those recent conversations that we had, you can really tell where people are hearing God's call and following God's vision for their lives, but also in their ministry for the context in which they work. And so I think we might have some interesting conversations with some of them to see how the church is really kind of being in ministry in the world. One idea is around kind of green spaces and community collaboration, after a conversation with somebody that runs kind of a nonprofit in the mountains. And so I also think it'll be interesting just to see some of the creative ways people are being in ministry and serving and following God in the new year.
So we have one last question. What are your hopes for the future?
You said earlier that we hit 10,000 downloads recently.
Yeah, we did.
I hope we hit 20,000 downloads real soon.
I hope we hit 100,000. Let's go
Let's
big.
go for it. Let's do it. Yeah. And I just really enjoy the way things are going. And I just hope that it continues this way. I hope that we can kind of break through this challenging season of pandemic and be able to do some things together again. I think some of my best memories have been a lot of what's happened either before we started recording or after. I really enjoyed times when we were just maybe 7 of us even all in a room recording one podcast, or the trip that Kim and I took to, I think it was Jamestown, North Carolina. We took a road trip together to record an episode and stopped at Chick-fil-A on the way back. So Chick-fil-A, if you're listening to this, we would love to have a sponsor, but anyway, but I really enjoy a lot of the behind the scenes opportunities that we've had. So that's my hope for the future, is for us to continue in that way.
Mm-hmm. I'll second that. Some of my favorite episodes have been when we've been able to go to your church to visit people on the ground, doing ministry on the ground. So we've done a little bit of that in the fall with parking lot, park and praise, worship, things like that. But I'm really looking forward to, after the vaccine, getting back on the ground and coming to you to tell your stories. I think storytelling is always a major part of this podcast, and it always will be, regardless of what that looks like. But that's been one part that I've really enjoyed as well. So I can't wait for us to get back to that.
One of the great things about the podcast and doing it on a weekly basis, and it really takes very little tech or very little time, is to be able to respond in real time kind of to whatever the needs are, whatever the contexts are as they unfold. So I guess I hope in the new year that we find ways to celebrate what's going well, that we find ways to resource new ways of doing ministry, that we're able to encourage risk taking and show examples kind of where people are taking risks and trying something new. And really to be able to lift up our leaders in Western North Carolina and enable them to provide strength and support to each other, that we're really just the means by which the conversations happen and the way to connect people to one another. And so I hope that we'll be able to do more of that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think mine kind of goes along with that, now that the church has gotten a taste for adaptive change, that maybe that'll become a regular part of who we are. And it's been a part of who we are for the past 2,000 years. We're very different than we were 2,000 years ago, or who we were 400 years ago. But I think we've kind of gotten stuck in a little bit of a rut this past 50 years. And I'm just excited to see what could happen when we have that taste for change, but also we can gather in person. I think the possibilities are endless. And I will say too, I don't want to come off too strong on change. I think that change exists so that we can conserve the holy things that we've inherited, the traditions, the liturgy, the language, the Methodist way of holiness. So when I say change, I mean that kind of change that keeps our tradition moving forward into future generations. So it gives me hope, and look forward to see how things shake out once we can be back together again.
I would say too, Luke, that this has been an opportunity for people who may not have ever connected to the church to do so, because of some of the local missions and local ministry and adaptive leadership that has happened. People in the communities have actually looked to the church to fulfill some needs that maybe we weren't looked to as first choice before this pandemic. And so I'm hoping that we can tell some of those stories and of transformation, that we can find those folks and tell their story of how real transformation has taken place while we've been adaptive and while we've tried to meet those needs in the community.
Awesome. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Means of Grace. We'd love to hear from you. What's been your favorite episode of 2020? And also, what do you want to hear in the future? Shoot us a note. We'd love to hear your opinions, your thoughts, and what you think about the podcast. You're just as much a part of this as any of us. So Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and we'll see you on January 5th for our next episode.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. Once again, that's at WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.